You're listening to Sustainably Geeky, the podcast for everyday environmentalists.
Hi, you're listening to Sustainably Geeky. I'm your host, Jennifer, and I am joined today by Chris. Chris hasn't been on in a few episodes, so we're really excited to have her back for this one. But we wanted to have her on because we're talking about raising green teens, and Chris has two of those. So,
Happen to have some, yes.
Yes, she is our resident expert on the show.
Oh, God.
So we've also got our special guest today is Manda Aufochs Gillespie, and she is the author of Green Mama and Green Mama to Be, and creator of greenmama.com, host of the Eco Parent podcast, Raising Greener Teens. So Manda, thank you so much for being on. And I guess, can you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and where your passion for sustainability started?
Hi, thank you so much for having me and for doing this work. Wow, so I live now on a tiny little island in the west coast of BC, and but I'm originally from the US, and I grew up in the inner city in a mixed race family. Very low income. And I think that the dichotomy of growing up and sort of pursuing higher education, and I went to a school called Oberlin, and becoming more and more aware of the world around me, and also personally finding quite a bit of comfort and reprieve in the ecological world around me. Uh, that then combined with this sort of deep knowing that we'd created a world where even having access to nature, having access to healthier options are defined really by class, and how you grow, like how you live, where you live, often even the color of your skin, etc. So I think it kind of made me both passionate about the opportunities that exist through the ecological world, through thinking about things more holistically, and also deeply concerned about how we have made this a super privileged place to be, and not something that truly feels equitable or fair or accessible, which isn't that such a deep irony? That our connection with the earth and nature would somehow have been now become this elitist thing that only some have access to.
Yeah, the thing that should be the easiest to access theoretically because it's just everywhere. It is, yeah, like you said, kind of a privileged thing nowadays for some reason. And I'm really glad that the focus on sustainability has become more intersectional, and we realize that, everything's related when it comes to environmental justice and class and race and all the things you mentioned, and gender. So, yeah, this should be an interesting talk. Thank you for bringing that up. And so you have written a couple books and you host a podcast. So how did you kind of come to do this work, and become the Green Mama as you're known?
It feels in many ways a million miles away, particularly now that I'm in the phase of motherhood of raising teens, which is really different. So way back when I worked in the sustainability field, I did basically environmental planning, and I worked for a small nonprofit in Cleveland. And as part of that, I also did a lot of writing, and just thinking about ecological design and what does it mean to create neighborhoods, cities, roads, experiences, lives that do that have an equity aspect, and an equity aspect as it comes that maybe we'd say has an equity aspect that includes the ecological as well as the human component. So coming from that background, when I got pregnant, I went about it from this place of research and thinking about it from almost a design perspective. Like, what does it mean to truly have a more ecological pregnancy, to think about things around health and where we live and how we live as it relates to another body growing inside you, another person. So like I already had some of the kind of health lens, but not so much. The health as equity or health as ecology really started growing more as I moved into motherhood. And it's not a big leap, right? We see that we are defined in many ways, both the health of our bodies by the health of the earth, by where we live, by those kind of aspects. And so when you're growing a body, you start to think so much more about that. And then already, if you're thinking about this with some aspect of, like most of us do now, of a lens of I feel like we keep saying equity, but of like who's getting to even think about health, thinking about organic food, thinking about healthier cleaning products. Who even gets to do that through pregnancy? It is so privileged to be able to do that. So pregnancy really changed that for me, and also it was this big moment. And then all of a sudden, I was being asked to not only write but also to do a podcast. I mean, this was 16 years ago when I started doing some of my first green podcasting stuff on a show called Little Green People, which is long since gone. And I was hired by the Nature Museum in Chicago to teach classes on for parents on green parenting. And then I started just a bunch of I would call them cafes where people would come together and talk about different aspects of health, pregnancy, raising greener kids, as a way to bring people closer through ideas, through information. Because I find for everybody who are as interested in green, there's a way in. And right, and that might be food, that might be their children, that might be recycling, that might be the geeky stuff, like the technical stuff, like, oh my gosh, we can create power with the sun. We don't need to do it this way. So the more we came together, I felt like around ideas and just made it open, right? Come, there's a place for your kid to play. There's other, usually it was women, but didn't have to be that, to share ideas, to share information, to share different ways in. And these groups were just so inspiring. And having come from this background in more ecological planning and more of the urban world and the corporate world with this, and where I felt like the green movement at that time in that place was really about convincing people, convincing businesses that it made sense, convincing architects to design it into their buildings, convincing planners to design it into their cities. And all of a sudden, it was a complete shift, right? When you're there with a bunch of parents or soon to be parents, like they feel like they're raising the next generation. They feel embedded into the world, and whether or not we can believe in a sense of hope or that things might get better, because they need to believe in that. They need to feel like they're making the world something that they want their children to inherit. And so instead of ever needing to convince people, it was like, people following me into the bathroom afterwards to, well, what about this? What about that? And that is such a beautiful shift in right from anyone who cares about the sort of bigger picture. It's like, oh yes, I really only want to spend time with people who are curious and interested in dealing with the hard questions, right? Like, well, how do we? How do we? And so that's where I spent much of the rest, like the next part of my life, which is just asking those hard questions and doing the research and not being afraid to realize that we live in a time of a great reckoning where we're trying to reconcile basically the fundamentally irreconcilable, right? Where we are living in worlds that we have fundamentally changed, shaped, damaged, where we have hurt other people, other creatures, and yet we believe enough in the potential of doing it better to bring children into it, to or if we don't, to share with others what we're learning, with the idea that we are going to somehow make this future better in some small way.
Yeah, that's a great journey, and it is something that I think, like you said, having kids for a lot of people can be transformational if they didn't already think about these things. But it's interesting that you brought up at the end, whether or not people should bring or want to bring children into the world, because that is a question that's coming up a lot now too, with the climate crisis and kind of the ethical implications of that. Um, so yeah, thank you for sharing your journey there. And I guess before we kind of jump into talking about raising greener teens in general and older kids, I'd like to kind of share with the audience, what your both of your situations are. So Chris, you have two kids. Um, I guess tell us, their age and a little bit about them, and kind of maybe what you've noticed as a mom, some of the challenges or opportunities of raising kids sustainably.
So I have two lovely children. They're 16. My daughter's 16, and my son is 14. And if you watch our other podcasts, you've probably seen them and heard me talk about them. They're just really cool people. But I came from a place of motherhood where it was a big surprise. And I had no forethought of what this means for environmental, my bot, none of that. All it was just we were thinking about it, and then boom, all of a sudden, it's happening. And I had pretty decent bout of postpartum depression when I had her, so my thoughts were not on creating this sort of environment for her and myself and our family. I wasn't thinking about that. And then when I came out of it, then the world sort of opens up again. You're not in your narrow scope anymore. And when I came out, it was just like, oh, okay. I don't have anybody around me who does this. I lived in a very rural town. Like I said, pregnancy was a surprise. So we didn't know anybody who was having babies, and we didn't, let alone being married and doing this. And I had come from a educational background of parks and forest and ecotourism. So I'd sort of like a working knowledge, and my husband was like, that's cute, babe. And so I'm the spearhead of all of this. And the kids came along, and, for me, it was my mom groups were really integral to that. And we all supported each other, and we would talk about different methods of diapering and different, foods we were trying and the way we were trying them with the kids and stuff. And so that was really great. And they are very different people. They're two very different. My daughter, whose name is Logan, she, who Jen knows because she's met her, is a woman who has her stuff together and always has. And so she already worries about it. She's very aware. We've talked about it. She wants children. She understands that that's an uphill battle, that will be bringing kids into a world that's maybe not set up the way she was brought into, like the world that she was brought into. And she worries about that. It's a constant worry that she blatantly told me she tries not to think about, because it's everywhere and everybody talks about it.
She's so young to be that self-aware. That's amazing. Like, I wasn't thinking that way at her. So.
Well, no, and neither was I. Like I said, she came out of the womb with her stuff together. Like she's not a teen. She gets annoyed by other teenagers, what is, because she finds them annoying. But she thinks about it. It's a big concern for her. And right now, I think for her, she does what she can in terms of talking about it with her friends. At home, she sort of knows the setup, although I do get made fun of for it. She teases me and stuff, which is totally fine. She knows that. I have a big thing about bottled water. So anytime we go to the grandparents, she's like, Mom, shaking the water bottle. I'm like, yeah, I get it. You're not getting it at home, so whatever. It's like a treat for her to have a bottled water. And then with my son is neurodivergent. He has something called social pragmatic communication disorder, which presents very much like autism, but it's not. And so for him, all of his thoughts and everything are locked inside. And it's very interesting to parent somebody who, you have one who's an expert communicator and can tell you at any given time how she's feeling. And you have another kid whose brain won't let him. And talking to him about it, he's aware, he pays attention to everything, he is very present, but to get him to talk about it and to see where he's at is very difficult. So we just go with the lead by example and hope that he's picked it up enough that he can see it, that when he goes out into the world that he can implement those things. But we have had to parent them very, very differently, because for so long our son couldn't hear us. He had a hearing impairment. That's been fixed, but then it was, speech therapy and lots of therapy and a diagnosis. And what do you do with a child who has a neurodivergence like that? And how do you talk to them about the environment? How do you talk to them about things they're going to have to decide when they're older that are going to matter? And it's interesting to talk to him about it. He's so cool, and he's just, the things he comes up with are amazing, and he is not living on this plane of existence. So it's very interesting to talk to him about it. And when you do get something out of him, and when he can focus enough to talk to you about that, he knows it, he's aware, but again, it flits right out of his mind because he's got other things that take precedent in his brain. So it's very different. But my hope is that I have embedded some of my things. They did say composting, that they would be composting. They get that, they understand that. I'm like, okay, it's composting. And so I'll be watching when they're older and they get out, and I'll be like, no, I did that. Yeah, no, you picked that up whether you liked it or not. So, but they do think about it, and it is a big worry for them.
Yeah, and it's like, for me, I don't have children, but one of the things I think about if I ever were to have kids is I just worry, like, how do you get them to, like, do the right thing? And not just with the environment, but just anything in life. And it's hard because it's like, you can tell them all day, you can show them all day, but ultimately, like, they're their own person, and you have to hope that they, like you said, retained it or have the moral capacity or whatever. And that's one of the things that scares me to death is, if I ever have kids, like, what if they, just ignore everything I've ever taught them and do
Well,
the
but
opposite?
they're people too, right? So you have to meet them where they are. They're
Right.
their own autonomous they're individuals, and you have to meet them where they are. They're not you. And so with us, it's like, okay, just because I care about it and it's important to me doesn't mean that it's going to be important to them the way it is to me. So how can I work with what I got here and not force myself on them and my beliefs and all that kind of stuff? It's like an efficiency thing.
Yeah.
I got to work with the system I'm in, and it's tricky though. It's tricky. Teenagers are a trip.
Oh yeah.
They're a total trip. They're a total trip. And it's like awesome to watch it and also remember, like, I'm so glad I'm not a teenager. I'm so happy.
Well, Amanda, I'm curious as to what your experience is. You also have two teens, right? About the same age, I think.
Yeah, just a little bit younger. So I have two girls, a 12-year-old and a 15, almost 16-year-old. And I just feel like both of you summed it up so well, but maybe it took me a little longer to get there. Which is, fundamentally, children are their own beings that have come into this world, right? And I think that we can feel when they're younger, and we do, of course, we have way more agency, if not in who they are. I think we can believe it's in who they are, but really when they're younger, what we have actually agency around is in the world around them a bit more, right? Like we can, and again, that is got a lot of privilege in it, but the extent that we can, just be a family that recycles and composts and buys the most important foods organic that you can buy organic, and doesn't, knows the problems with bottled water and, et cetera. And so you can kind of create that world, and then they get to be a teenager. And it's really, I think, this big test because, Chris, you said it so well. And I think, Jennifer, it's pretty amazing that you can have that insight as a non-parent already. And this is what I always say. I feel like some of us have to be parents in order to learn like the fundamental lessons of this life, which are that we cannot control other people, right? That we are, and to love them even when you can't control them or influence them as much as you want, etc. And so somehow some people just learn that without having kids, and others of us have to do the whole kid thing. So I think that's been a big deal. And for me, with having teenagers, like my fundamental question that I want to bring to them, I think, or the thing that I hope for them, is that I give them the tools to be those engaged, passionate, curious adults that I think we need, right? For the future that we are about to inherit, we have to be more nimble, more curious, be able to lean into people who are so different than us, and find a way forward. And I that has been something that I've also come to kind of value more, or be more curious about. How do we actually do this, when I as coming to Canada, because now I live in West Coast Canada, and that's really different than living in Ohio or Chicago, which is where I lived before, and having more of this sort of big city life. And also Americans, like, we're really much more likely to question authority, to question the status quo. I think also maybe that's like the Irish people do that too, but I don't know. But and I also notice it in Canada for people who are, from like Toronto or places like that, that they might also question the status quo. But a lot of people, that is not culturally what they've been raised to do. And boy, do we have a lot of questioning to do to move forward. And so I think, this is one of my great things with having teenagers, is like, how do I get them to be curious, get them to engage in asking deeper questions, get them to feel like they have some autonomy over themselves, their bodies, their lives, the world, the future that they're going to inhabit. And at the same time, like, getting over, like, what do you do when they're like, actually, I decided I'm going to use this really horrible antiperspirant that I know you've done the research, and it's not only kind of kill off my positive, like, good, healthy bacteria in my arms, but it's also going to, expose me to aluminum that might lead to Alzheimer's later, and you're like, I really want to give you research right now, but I know that that is not the right answer. So, I mostly get it wrong quite a bit, and then hope that I can, everyone will live another day so I can maybe get it right then.
Yeah, I mean, from what I hear, being a parent is mostly figuring out as you go, and it makes us much more compassionate towards our own parents, I guess, when we look back and think, oh, this is what it was like for them. No wonder, they did this or that, because it's impossible to really to get everything right. I mean, especially when you're dealing with, as Chris said, autonomous beings who are going to do their own thing, regardless of what you tell them. I don't have, like I said, I don't have kids, but I am the oldest child of many. And there's a pretty big age gap between myself and the youngest. So I was told many times, and still told by them when they were teens, how old I am and how out of touch I am with so many different things, because I was just so much older in my 20s and 30s while they were teenagers. So that's always nice to hear, but I'm sure it was all in love, right?
I know a lot of my friends who were the oldest of lots of kids did not go on to have kids, because they're like, I kind of did that, and I see it for what it is. Like, that's just hard.
Yeah, I kind of raised my siblings in a way, like, not totally, but I helped raise them. So, but yeah, teenagers are an interesting bunch, and I think we hear a lot about sustainable parenting for younger kids and babies, especially, and because there is a lot of like waste that can go along with having kids, and we hear about that, and the food, and the health aspects. But I think it's interesting to talk specifically about teens. That's why I was interested in like bringing this onto the show, because with teens, I think it is more about instilling the values. I mean, you're also trying to instill the habits and things that you are when they're younger, but like you said, Amanda, you want to kind of get them to make the right decisions and understand why this is important. So that was kind of what I was thinking we could focus on today a little bit, and see where the conversation goes. But what have you guys noticed, if anything, if you figured out, any effective ways to kind of model good behavior and get the teens, or even when they're younger, to pick up on it and kind of carry that forward? Are there I guess, are there ways of doing that, or things that you've noticed are more or less effective? Probably not shoving research down their face, like you said, is one thing not to do, but
I'm hoping Chris is going to have lots of fantastic answers. Is that too much pressure? Like,
Yeah, no pressure. It's totally fine. So with us, my husband and I have a philosophy that we are not raising children. We are raising adults to be grown up in the society they're going to be living in. So it's our job to give them the tools to be, to trust their instincts, to when, crap hits the fan, that they are like, okay, I'm gonna step back, but I got this. And that we're here is their safe place. Home is where you can let it all go. So that's sort of been our philosophy. And because I am the more environmentally minded one out of this family, it's my husband's been very supportive, and we talk about it a lot. We're a very, very talky family. And for us, what I think has worked is we sort of, maybe not sort of, but with Logan specifically, because she's the one that has whose brain lets her communicate, just talking to her about just things that happen in the world and just getting her opinion on them, and talking to her like she's not necessarily an adult, but that she has paid attention. Kids are sponges. They see everything. They pick up on everything, whether you think they are or not. And for us, it was just talking to her about, okay, so this thing happened. What do you think? And for 6 years, we lived in a little cottage. It was about 620 square feet. Jen was there, on the lake. And it was a small space, and talking to the kids about why we lived here. And the whole point of it was, 6 years of being immersed in nature was pretty cool, but we outgrew the space and needed to leave, and talking to them about that. But also my decision to be, with husband's support, of being zero waste as much as possible. What does that mean? Why am I doing that? Why does it matter? What's the point? And then now, as Logan's gotten older, she's talking about getting her driver's license. We have an electric car. What does that mean? Why did we buy it? Just talking to her about, things she's going to have to start thinking about, and seeing where she's at, and then meeting her there. Because she's her own person. She's got a double dose of stubbornness from both of us. So we learned very early, we cannot oust ourselves upon her. She will her karate teacher called her the most stubborn 4-year-old I'd ever met. And she actually got kicked out of karate because of that. She refused to listen. So knowing that about her, knowing it's not about, she will never succumb to peer pressure. She will never succumb to that. So it's just telling her, or asking her questions about her life, asking her questions about her friends, asking them what they talk about. And asking her not so much world events, so much, sometimes we've talked about Ukraine, we've talked about that. A political environment, she's 2 years away from being able to vote. She's much more politically aware than I am. I am ashamed to say I didn't vote till I was 34, because I just wasn't. And and then with Quinn, it's a lot of modeling. It's a lot of physically modeling for him, because, like I said, talking is a struggle for him, and communicating is a struggle. So for him, he sees everything and he hears everything. He just can't talk about it. So that's what we do, is one we can talk to, the other one is 180. We have to do practices, and it's, we have an electric mower. What does that mean? Why did we get it? Price of gas. My daughter's been very aware of that, because we keep a log. And I know in BC it's more expensive. I think gas in BC has always been more expensive than in Ontario. I don't know why. But she saw it the other day and she's like, what? And I told her, and I showed her the log, and she looked back and she just was mind blown by that. And I couldn't fill up the tank because it was going to cost $100. And just things like it. So she's picking up on things probably more than I know. And she also has a a generalized anxiety and OCD. So there's only also so far I can go with that before it becomes a deep-seated worry, and then
It
it becomes
seems,
a thing.
yeah, it seems like your approach is, like you said, you're treating them like adults, so you're communicating with them, which is great, because it always sucks when you were a kid and people were just like, oh, just do it because I said so, and didn't give you the background. Like,
Yeah.
they're not likely. I don't feel like kids are going to be likely to carry on habits if you just tell them to do it and don't tell them the why, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's great. And also, I think, like, including her in the discussion and maybe like asking for her input is a good thing too, because then she's more likely to feel empowered and like, oh, I can actually do this because I knew
Mhm.
what I was talking about, or, like, I had a good idea and they did it. So I love that. Like, you're treating them like they're adults, the adults they're going to be, because they're going to be the ones eventually running their own lives.
Yeah, well, and they are, and when you think of a lifespan of a human, they're children for like this amount, and they're adults for so much longer, you know. And well, childhood is a magical, wonderful experience, and it's wonderful, and it's also wonderful to watch, which is one of my favorite things about being a parent is just watching the magic happen. Um, Life is also messy and complicated, and talking to them like they don't know, like teenagers is a weird thing, right? Like, because you're very aware, and you want a lot of responsibility, you want to prove yourself, but you have people around you telling you you don't know any better, you're too young, but still expecting you to have all this responsibility and make these choices. So it's like this, your brain's not fully developed, it's still doing its frontal lobe thing till you're 25, and it's just very intense. And not, you don't have to, shielding them is a terrible thing. Not letting them experience pain and discomfort and mistakes is also not great either. But yeah, you just want to be aware and pay attention. And there's these, so I did a little studying of big history, and there's like 4 different tenets when you're looking at research, because you also have to be a smart researcher as well, and a smart consumer of media. You don't want to just because Facebook said it, that means it's true, because we all know what happens with that. Bad things happen when you just believe crap on Facebook. So is it trust your intuition, trust the expert, like who's saying it. And I can't remember them now that I'm saying them. Your intuition, the expert, the information that's there, and just using your own judgment to consume that media, and what does that mean. And yeah, we ask a lot of questions around here. It's a lot of questions, a lot of talks. Yeah, that's all. I don't know if that but that works for our family. What works for your family would be different, because your kids are different, and you have to be parents. You parent each kid according to what they need, and that's
I
what ours need.
I I just love the way that you frame that. I'm like, oh, I want her to be my parent. And I think that is the yeah, like your kids grow up, and it does get harder. And I think you see, like, with someone, like you, Chris, I'm like, oh, you got it really fast. That kind of, I mean, it seems, it's always easier to
Yeah.
idolize the person who is not you, and how they're doing it. But I think that aspect is really a big deal. Just sort of realizing that you have been given these, as Chris says, autonomous beings, and how do you meet them, and how fundamentally what we seem to be failing at so much is raising future adults. So I really like the way that you talk about that. And I think that's a nicer way of sort of saying the thing that I also try to prioritize. And what um I always sort of go at, like, when I with the Raising Greener Teens podcast and things like that, and also with all my books, I'm going after the parents, right? Because fundamentally, we are the ones often that have to do the changing. Like, the kids are doing their thing. And we're the ones who, and when they're little, whether you, particularly if you have a biological child, you have all those hormones that are part of your pregnancy process are there in large part to help change your brain. So a new parent, even a non-biological parent, will go through an involved non-biological parent will go through massive amounts of brain changes. And for the new mom, it's the largest brain change after adolescence. So, I think you get to the teenage years and you need to, and your child is going through the hugest brain change since their toddler years, but you don't have any of that leftover oxytocin and all that stuff to make your brain all squishy and malleable. Because really, a parent, in order to, I think, survive through those and thrive through those teenage years, has got to be going through their own brain changes, right? Like, we've got to do what our kids are doing, which is fundamentally be melted down and reborn into the like new adult versions of themselves and ourselves. And so I think it's a fantastic opportunity, but boy, is it hard. And this is where I do think we reap the benefits of having been those parents who questioned things, made alternative choices, instinctively said, listen, this feels harder, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like, of course, like Chris, you're saying, I mean, zero waste in a little cottage, like, that's hard. Like, that is so hard. It's so hard. Fundamentally, you're making a tiny little difference in in the world. But why do you do it? You do it because, one, you're modeling something amazing to your children, but you're also doing it because you have just gone through a massive brain change, basically an exercise that means that you are able to take charge, think differently about your life, and setting up a precedent that it just means like, oh, okay, it's not going to be as hard for you to figure out this totally new way of being so that you can be there for your, further along the adult path children. And I just think I really admire that. And I've not really thought about that part of things with my own path until you shared that story. So, and I think it is important. And so when I think about like the teenage years and the things that I'm constantly, like when I bring experts onto my podcast to talk about, often I'm talking to them about like what is happening in their brains, like what is going on, and because that's the way I get relief, right? I get relief from a whole bunch of research. It makes me feel, even if I can't change anything, at least I understand what's going on. The so, and the other thing that is a big deal that, under the realm of brain changes is are the drugs. Like, there is a lot of, I mean, there's always been drugs, but now, particularly in BC, we are super, super deep into an opioid crisis. We have lost so many more people to dirty drugs and opioids than we have even come close to losing people from COVID. It is a huge issue. And I don't know a teenager out here that has not, uh, that doesn't know someone who they've lost to the opioid crisis or dirty drugs. So at least out here, this is a big part of the teenage experience, is them understanding that they're growing up with a really different world around experimentation. And I don't like, I want to approach this often with my children through that lens of research. I'm like, so just so you know, this is what's going to happen to your brain, when it's developing if you do too much drugs. And but I've also um, I run something here called Folk University on our little island, which is basically it's a people's university, and the idea is just sharing information, sharing ideas, etc. So both of my kids have done harm reduction classes. They've both learned how to use naloxone. My youngest learned when she was 9, which is of course way earlier than she's ever going to be exposed to someone having an overdose. But the idea being that nobody anymore, I don't think any teenager should grow up and not understand how to use an naloxone kit. Just like so, that's a big deal. And just sort of, and here there's, we live in this very, very remote community. Everybody knows how to grow food. Everybody composts. Everybody has that sort of awareness of of where their water comes from, what it takes to have a well, what it takes to maintain it, what it takes to deal with your waste. A lot of people in this community don't have running water. They use composting toilets. Everybody, all kids grow up here and know how to start fires, build fires, maintain fires, use knives, whittle, etc. These are, I think, really important life skills that I'm just like, oh, what a gift to give kids. Think about the effort that you have to go to give kids that essentiality of what it means to be human right now if you live in an urban area, which I used to. So I think it's pretty amazing when I see out here those kinds of things, and just sort of the awareness that comes around then food and what you're putting in your body. For me, I've also had to give up a little bit on that. I make still a lot of food from scratch. We grow a lot of our food. My oldest has learned how to slaughter chickens. We so much more of that is at that level when you live, rurally or remotely. And then I have to give up some of the dear God, you brought home Mr. Noodle, and that's like your idea of what you're going to feed all your friends for dinner. Do you know the MSG in there? So I think there is a little bit of this, okay, I hope that you've experienced enough curiosity, enough of what it feels like to have made good food choices, good whatever in your life, that you can, experiment and I will fuddle around a little bit, but I also really appreciate that my oldest daughter is able to, really talk to me sensibly about well, mom, so I'm doing this, I understand it's not good for me and I'm still going to do it because I'm a teenager, or, so yes, my, so and so friend is smoking pot, but, and yes, they're smoking too much. And I understand, I've tried to tell them what that's going to do to their brain, but at least they're growing their own. you know? you know? so I, so when some of the things that I focused on also, besides being really smart with drugs, and drug awareness, food choices, skin and makeup and body care products, what we put on our skin. As our kids age, their skin becomes more like an adult skin, which is somewhat less porous than a baby skin, but nevertheless, it is a more direct entry into your body than what you eat. So it's amazing what we put on our skin. And then certainly teenagers are under a lot of pressure to put a lot more funky things on their skin. And maybe I'm just lucky. I feel like I'm kind of lucky because my oldest daughter has really sensitive skin that's also very clear and relatively flawless. So I think she can't put anything strange on her skin without, things happening. So I'm just lucky in that way because she's had to be thoughtful about it, and is curious and wants to listen to people who are not me, but maybe a little bit more holistic, talk to them about what to do with the skin and diet and how those are related, and what you put in your body and how it matters. And then I think, kids are really very differently aware about the world than when I was young too. They're really growing up in a time when there's so much more, as you talking about, Chris, with your teenager, both my kids are sort of I don't know if I'm going to have children I don't know that I want to bring children into this world. And I think I have a lot of grief around that. I really feel those are the kids, especially those are the people who you especially want having the kids of the future. But I think this is the reality, is that I really feel no pressure to sort of wake them up to the environmental consequences of their time, because they're so awake. And I heard someone talk about it the other day, actually, and I thought this was really great. You know how we talk about tech natives, and all the, and us sort of older people who've had to learn computers and smartphones and all those things after we had our relatively formed brains. And by the way, it only takes 3 days for a person to have their brain completely rewire after being exposed to screens and computers and things like that. But as we all know, we are just not the same when it comes to technology as that younger generation who was born into it. And someone used that same phrase to talk about climate and climate change, and how this generation, they are climate natives. Like, they came into a world where they just knew from the beginning that it was not going to be the way we assumed it would be for us when we grew up. And interestingly enough, when I talk to young adults and older teens now, they're very aware of it, but it's not always like the thing, right? Like, the thing for them often is more around like navigating a world with where everybody has so many neurological differences and so much more awareness of how different their peers are showing up in the world. Everybody is more aware about gender and the vast fluidity and options that are available. Everyone seems more aware about just the role that discrimination is playing and has played. And so I feel like, wow, these kids are really awake to a lot of things that now I feel almost the opposite. It's like, how do we get them to also feel the joy, the relief, the safety, to lean into new ideas and to get out of the house, to take risks, to get things wrong, to fail, to have enough safety to fail. Boy, like, that is not the world we've given them, right? With cancel culture and dirty drugs and everything else. Like, I just feel like we took away the most essential teenage thing, which is the safety to fail, so that you can get up and try again. And yeah, I guess those are the things that I just wish that I had more answers to.
Man, that's yeah. It's a lot to unpack there, but I could certainly relate to the question of, should I have kids and bring them into this world? And like you said, like, you want the responsible, smart folks who are thinking about these hard questions to be the ones having kids, but they're also the ones that realize, like, yeah, that's part of the problem, is having more kids and consumption, and also just what world will they be inheriting. And I'll actually be talking to someone else on the Eco Parent Network about that a little bit next month, or in our next episode. So that should be an interesting conversation. But yeah, the teens are struggling with these hard questions that I don't remember struggling with at that age, and certainly my peers weren't. I think about people like Greta, who are, I mean, Greta Thunberg, who is just taking the world by storm, and she's so angry, and rightfully so, about the world that she's inheriting. And it's sad, because you feel, a lot of guilt as kind of the generation before, even if you weren't the one to, like, screw everything up. But you also, want to try to show them that there is still good in the world, like you said. And how do we, I guess, keep the hope alive for the kids who are growing up with the world on fire, and seeing the negative news all the time and everything. Um, I hadn't really thought about it that way, because I always just thought, how do we make them aware of the problems? But they probably are more aware than we give them credit for at the end of the day. Um, so you mentioned too, that, kids are hearing from a lot of different people. They're learning things from their peers, um, and so I'm curious as to, I guess, if you all have any experience with not only what they're learning from their peers, but maybe what they're learning at school, about not just the climate, but sustainable consumption. And maybe are they learning how to appreciate nature, how to grow things? Or, I know when I was in school, we didn't really learn much about that stuff. I did learn about climate change, but I guess more of the appreciation for the natural world. Do you guys see that changing at all, or is it still very focused on just the math, science, English kind of stuff?
I know for my kids, it's a little hard. They don't talk a whole lot about school, and I'm trying to remember what we did in school. Like we had our recycling programs, Captain Planet telling us to cut the little plastic rings and stuff. And, now I can't not do that. And now my kids do that. I watched my son do that the other day, and I'm like, oh, Captain Planet. And then, so I know history. The history that's being taught is a lot different than the history that I was taught. So Canadian history, from my recollection, was talking about Laura Secord and the Hudson Bay Company, and the fur trades and just the routes that they took. Things like geographical, like hard facts. We didn't learn about residential schools. I didn't know about residential schools till I was an adult, and it pissed me off. I'm like, I didn't learn any of this in Canadian history. It was just how the caucus runs. When do they meet? How long are elections? That kind of thing. And the fact that my daughter, and history is compulsory in high school, you have to take it at least for 1 year, and her learning about those things and talking to me about them, and just being made aware of. Like my dad was an Ontario provincial police. We don't have RCMP here. We have Ontario Provincial Police. And when I was a toddler, we lived in Northern Ontario, and we lived on a reserve. And I have no memory of it, but just hearing the stories of it. And I lived there, and I don't remember it, but it hasn't changed. It's still the same. The reparations aren't there. It's just this. We didn't learn about it, and the fact that they're learning about it now, about all the history, bad, good, otherwise. Because Canada may seem very polite and say A lot, and we love maple syrup, but we have a long history too of not being fantastic. And because we're still a very young country, we're still trying to figure it all out, and we have a history of being pretty terrible to the people here.
Are you saying that talking about the bad things in our past is actually a good thing?
What?
That's a novel concept, isn't it?
We have very short memories as humans. Our memories are not long, and we forget. And so when these things come up, we're baffled. Like, what? We're not like that anymore. It's like, a little bit. And so I'm happy that all of this is coming to light, and that they're actually learning about it, and it's the honest truth, not what looks good or what sounded good or what the winners tell us. And so I know that's different. I don't know. They go to a small high school. It's a 7 through 12. So they both go to the same school. And I don't know much about what else that they're like taking. It's just more the way the teachers teach is just different altogether across the board. It's far more interactive. Although my daughter's first year of high school was pretty much online, which was a very bizarre experience for her. And same for my son, who, we thought it would be great because there's less distractions at home. It turned out to be awful because there's more distractions at home, as it turns out. So there's that whole thing. But they're far more interactive with the students now. They're far more empathetic with their students. At least our experience is that they are far more aware of the different ways students learn than the way we grew up. Which is great, because my son, when my son is academically, he's not a red flag. He's actually very smart. His teachers understand him, and they understand, he's capable. We have to tweak it a bit, but he's totally capable of doing this, and they give him that environment. So I feel like just having an environment where the people who are teaching you things are more available to you and more willing to have those conversations is, and they're willing to question things too. The whole do as I say, not as I do thing does not fly anymore. You can't just tell kids to shut up because they're not listening to you. As soon as you start doing that, you're like, okay, well, now I'm not going to listen to you at all. You just told me to be quiet. So that's a surefire way to get a teenager not to listen to you, is sit there and tell them that you know more than they do, which may be true, but they know a lot too. So next year, my daughter is going to be in grade 11, and my son will be starting high school. And there's things they have to take. I have to take science and math and English and phys ed and stuff like that. But I'm interested to see where they want to go with that. Right now, my son wants to be a zoologist, which is great. He just backup is, well, the zoology is the backup degree. He really wants to be an author, but he's got to have a backup, so he's being responsible with zoology, in his words. And my daughter doesn't know. She has no clue. It changes all the time, and that's okay. And so she's exploring everything, but having those teachers understand, that that's what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to explore everything. Who at 18 knows what the heck they want to do with the rest of their life? That's a huge burden to put on a kid.
No, 37 and I don't know, like
I
don't think we ever figured that out.
I'm 40 and I have no clue and I'll never figure it out. But to just give them, the tools that they feel comfortable questioning authority, or just not in a disrespectful way, but being like, okay, but why? And, and like, I want to know what you mean by that. I just want to understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, the whole, this is how we've always done it.
Yeah, that's
response doesn't work. Yeah, like you encounter that in the workforce all the time. Like, well, this is how we do it, but why? It doesn't make sense. There's an easier way. There's a new tool. Like, it's good that we have a generation coming up that's just not going to take that because it's unproductive. It's a waste of people's time and money and resources, and just like we have better things to do.
Also, Amanda, I would like to grow up where you are because that sounds awesome. That was like my dream when you started talking about it. I'm like, oh, where's that here? I would like to go live there. That sounds awesome. And that your kids are growing up in that is amazing. And it's, my kids aren't experiencing that. We live in completely different, geographical parts of the country. But, when you grow up in a community of like-minded people, it's a wonderful experience, and you feel more rooted in your beliefs too because you've had that culture around you. So when you go out, you've got it. You're solid with what you believe in. You take that with you. So it's just that environment. You've got your kids. That's amazing. That sounds awesome.
I think I thank you, Chris. And I think there is, particularly for the young kid, it's really amazing. For the teenager, it's really lonely. We are one of the communities in Canada that still has no high school, and so you have to send your kids away, including, even though we have a large reserve. And so, as coming from a different country, I'm always like, but that is residential school when you don't provide education and you have to leave your culture and send kids somewhere with the hopes that someone will take them in and then pay like many hundreds, usually well over $1,000 a month to board them into some other community, right? So that is the situation where we live. So my kids are still here in this remote community with us, but then when you have a community where you send your teenagers away, the families who have the resources also leave and often don't come back, and so it really devastates a community. And I think it's still pretty remarkable to me that Canada, which is this big, huge country that has long had to figure out education across massive distances, is still allowing hundreds of its rural and remote students and families to go without any access to education. And I think that this is maybe the great gift of COVID. In our community, I think when things shut down, they shut down entirely. It didn't go online because there's too many people here who didn't have access to computers or internet. But what I think it did was to show the world that that there are other ways, like that, right? Like that we can't just pretend that education only looks one way anymore. Well, we just broke it open. We see now that education can look a lot of ways. And we also see that sitting in front of a computer and calling it like the complete deal is not enough, right? Like teenagers particularly need each other. Neurologically, they have to have that, a little bit of that tribe. So I think, on one hand, I want to just say that my also experience, which has been really different from like we've had to do a bunch of homeschooling. There's a little school on the island that we used when the kids were younger. We've now the kids go to a blended program, so twice a week they travel more than 4 hours for a day to go and be part of a school experience, and half that's on a boat. So, school looks like a crazy amount of trying to put it together. But I would say that I think that we are at a place where school is a huge bureaucracy from my experience, and Canada, and in North America and most countries. I think it's become sort of a bureaucracy belabored by its infrastructure that no longer knows what question it is trying to answer. Is it about creating the best education for the youth? Is it about creating the future leaders? Is it about creating future factory workers? Is it about daycare? Is it what are we doing with school? Because I think the question informs the answer. And I would say that it's amazing to see how much progress is being made around reconciliation. And actually, there is not a kid today that I know any age who can't speak somewhat intelligently about the Indigenous experience and how recent we were still perpetuating the crimes and of residential school. That's pretty amazing that change happened in one generation. And so that's pretty cool, and that's happening out of school. And I think there are these things that are starting to change where we're realizing, so on our little island next year, we've started this program where kids get to, as part of their public school experience, come here for a semester, and they are going to be in kayaks and hiking and working with working scientists who are going to come and teach them about the marine environment. They're going to learn about seaweed growing and aquaculture and sustainable aquaculture and the future of the blue economy. And they're going to learn how to make their own podcasts about these kinds of things. And they're going to learn to make their own films, and they're going to get high school credit for that stuff. So and this is happening with our school district. So within this great, I would call it maybe almost like an abyss of like things not happening and huge amounts of needs, there are these sparks also. Like, that's school. That's like the best summer camp ever, and we're figuring out how to like have that be school. So there are these gems of possibility, and I still am either naive or hopeful enough to think those gems can spread, right? As soon as one thing is done like that, then it becomes easier for the next person to hopefully learn from that and plant their own seed in their own community. So but I would also say that I think that a large part of what school is for teenagers is about having a chance to practice out these ways of being with each other. And so I do hope that we figure out better and more creative ways to do that. But in the meantime, I think that's what it is. And teenagers have changed so much with their what they're grappling with. So I would like to see more happen, I guess, on that front. But I do think it's important to recognize some stuff has happened.
I love that these programs you're talking about, like hands-on activities, getting out in nature. I love the idea of that, and I wish, like you said, they were more the rule and not the exception. It seems like these schools are just specialized, or short-term kind of options, and I wish more schools in general were just implementing that kind of thinking and activity into their daily routine rather than focusing on tests, standardized tests and memorization, and skills that aren't actually going to serve us in the long run. I mean, I'm all about learning a myriad of things, but we definitely need to be focusing, I think, more on the holistic and the natural world in that way. And as Chris said, talking about the hard things, especially in the US, we've had a lot of as I'm sure everyone knows, issues with trying to ban certain knowledge from being talked about in schools, certain books, and it's very scary when you start censoring that kind of information about whole cultures, whole groups of people. Yeah, it's not a great place to be going, and I want to see the opposite happening. So, but like you said, I think our kids are smart enough to kind of know when they're being hoodwinked like that. Like they're picking up on this isn't reflective of the people around me or the experiences I'm having. So I'm hopeful that the people that are trying to keep the information out of their hands aren't successful, and ultimately we can see these kids kind of overcome that if they go into place.
I,
Yeah.
can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah.
What are you seeing as far as higher education? How is that being valued both with young adults and with teenagers right now? What do people think about that? How much of a priority is it for workplace, for jobs, for just, yeah, like how are people holding that now?
What specifically are you referring to? Just like,
Yeah, I mean, like, do people like are teenagers today? Do they feel like, yes, I'm for sure going to university. I'm going to do a 4-year university. That's the thing I want to do, or are they thinking about other things? And in the workforce and with young adults, is there this like, oh, I should get another degree, or I should go back to school, or I should do this, or is it leaning somewhere else, like towards trades programs or practical skills or just learning on the job? Like
yeah.
where are you feeling things where you are?
Well, my experience having two siblings, well, more than two actually, I have other siblings, but the two that I kind of grew up with that graduated high school in the last 5 years didn't go on to go straight into school. One of them went into the workforce, and the other one started working more recently. And now the one in the workforce is looking at going to trade school. And, I was very big on like trying to get them into school, at least for a trade, or if not a full-time degree, because I don't believe that everybody needs, a college 4-year degree. That's not practical, nor are there the jobs to support that. But we do need people to do, the trade work and whatever else. But since, he didn't know what he wanted to do, I thought, well, try different things. So he's just now getting to that point where he's ready to start exploring that. And I think more kids now are seeing that, like, yeah, like you got all these degrees and that's not getting you anywhere, or you're still going to school. So why should I even bother? I think there's more of a focus on either getting a trade or getting into the workforce and then figuring it out, maybe. Like I know when I went to school, it was all you heard about was the 4-year degree. But then I worked in higher education, and we worked at a community college, and we did the trade schools and the associate's degrees, and it was like you can find a job making more money doing some of those jobs than I was making with my 4-year degree and paying off student loans. So I think the focus needs to shift, and it is slowly shifting on to some of the high skilled, high demand jobs that people just didn't think about before. But I also think it depends on like where you live and your family. Like a lot of families are just going to push their kids straight into the college funnel and everything. At least where I am. So I don't know if Chris has a different experience.
I know, like, I have a diploma and a post diploma, and my husband has a certificate. So he actually, it's like a level down. It's ridiculous. But with the kids, we told them, if you don't know, which is fine at 18, how are you supposed to have it all figured out? If you're not sure what school to apply to, and you want to have that secondary, post-secondary experience, go to trade school, because trades are always one of those things that are needed. And oftentimes they'll pay you to go to school. And while and you can get a job. And while you're figuring out your life and being able to support yourself, maybe you'll have a spark of inspiration and you find you want to go to school for this. That's great. We're not pushing it, but I do find now, especially with social media, and kids are far more entrepreneurial than I remember it being, right? They have access to way more platforms and information and mentors and all that kind of stuff than we did. But I was also part of the generation of like, you will go to school, you go to post-secondary, that's not an option. And then you go and you get out and you're like, what was that? No. Was it necessary? I mean, I don't regret not. I mean, I loved going to school. It was fun. It was an amazing experience, and it taught me a lot about myself and being an independent person. But I don't use my diplomas. I don't use them. I've been a stay-at-home mom for 16 and a half years. So I don't, talk about ecotourism to my kids. They don't, that's some part of their radar. But yeah, we haven't pushed it, but it's like, you do have to be able to take care of yourself. You are going to have to make money, much to the chagrin of my husband. We do not live in a Gene Roddenberry utopia where money doesn't exist. So you have to be able to support yourself in some way. So is that going to trade school? Those are always needed. There's never a shortage of, because of the infrastructure we have. There's no shortage of electricians are going to be needed, or plumbers, or a carpenter, or whatever. They're always going to be needed, and you can go anywhere with that. Or do you know? And go there. And if you get halfway through and you decide that this is a nightmare and I don't want to do this anymore, and you change your mind, that's okay too. You don't have to stay stuck with it. My niece is at McGill right now. She's just finished up her second year. And halfway through her first year, she's like, oh, nope, I need to switch departments because this is not what I thought it was going to be. And she has, and she loves the program she's in now. But she had to figure it out for herself. And I don't think there's this big, at least I don't feel like there's this big push that you must go to post-secondary. You have to go or you won't get a job. There's so many.
Yeah.
The world is completely different that way now.
Like getting a degree for the sake of getting a degree isn't as big of a thing now. I think it's more, and I think too, like our generation and the ones that followed it are more inclined to find a job that they enjoy doing, and they're not going to stick around for a job that is not fulfilling. Like I was part of the Great Resignation during COVID because I realized like I enjoy my job, I like the people I work with, but this isn't what I want to do long term, and life is short, and anything can happen, and I need to go ahead and take advantage of as soon as I'm able to. Figuring out my next step. So I think the younger generations are seeing that and just kind of grew up with that mindset, like you said with the other stuff, Manda. Like that's just a given for them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experiences. Because it feels to me really different here than when I was young. Like I was definitely, my family, we all did different things, but it was sort of like if you had access, you went and got more education and more education. And I have, an advanced degree and all this stuff. And I, and I feel like that's not the world now. It's like most of the kids I know around me are not going on to traditional university, or if they do, they're not it's sort of why bother, because they're not doing anything with those degrees.
Okay, ladies. Well, is there anything else we haven't talked about or covered relating to green teens that you guys want to throw in before we move on?
One of the questions I would have for both of you really is around screens and technology. And I think this is one of the things in the green movement as adults that we don't really talk enough about, which is the consequences of our own technology use, and how much they're changing our brains, but also I think our kind of awareness of the world around us, whether that's human or ecological. And then certainly this comes up with teenagers because they're growing up with the kinds of pressures around technology and screen use that it's almost hard to imagine other than the fact that we're living with it. And then, we just spent 2.5 years where a large part of all of our interactions have been through screens. And I'm wondering how you guys are dealing with that in your own lives, whether you're seeing it influence or impact the way people are showing up for kind of the bigger picture or the things that you feel like we ought to be.
You want to go, Chris?
Sure. So screen time is always one of those things that I feel. I don't know how I feel about it. I feel a lot of things, but it's hard to articulate. With our kids, when they were younger, because Ray and I are such big movie geeks and TV geeks, and a lot of our first parts of our relationship were formed by going to movies and bonding over that. With the kids, it was the whole experience of going to the movie theaters and movies in general, and bonding over that with the kids. With Logan, she social media was one of those things where I was like really like if I had social media as a teenager, I would have a lot more complexes than I do already. So that was a bonus not to have it. Plus the stuff I did, I'm glad there's no record of it, because yikes. So we had talked to her at length, talked to her about, social media. What does it mean? Or her friends weren't on it. She was kind of wonderfully in a late bloomer club, which was fantastic because there was no pressure to be on it. She has 2 older cousins that were, but again, she didn't feel any pressure. We started with Instagram. Because it was, the one you could make it private, you could control who followed you, who you followed, all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of rules surrounding that. We kind of dipped our toes in. Now she has TikTok, which I don't understand. And then, our son being the way, with his disorder, technology was a bridge for communication for him. So we view it very differently. Technology for him and screens for him is a way for us to see into his world, and a way for us to communicate with him and get to know him better, and for him to be able to express himself and to basically let us in and help him experience the world. So we have a very different view that way on technology, seeing it as sort of, it's a wonderful help for us with him, with his specific disorder. Can there be too much? Absolutely. I did have to, there's limits, especially during summertime. We can't be on it all day, as much as that would be great. We can't, you got to get up, you got to move around. There's other things in the world we're going to do. So there's monitoring, but again, the moment you start making something taboo, the moment the kids are like, okay, guess what I'm doing the moment I get out. And then they overindulge. And then there's no way for them to be able to regulate it, because they never learned those skills, because you've made something so like never, and never really explained it, right? Like you're just, so we never made it taboo. We never made it. There's rules, there's regulations, there's, but the older they get, the less and less they get, because, they need to know how to police themselves that way too. When it came to school online, that was a nightmare. Those first 2 months for school was a joke. And I felt for the teachers. Teachers don't get enough credit for this. Trying to put all of school online with the limited amount of resources and programs that they had must have been so stressful, and just, they'll probably be dealing with the aftermath of that for a long time. And my hat's off to them. That was just an amazing, incredible responsibility. It got better last year. I know where we were in Ontario, we had a very back and forth swing of lockdowns and not lockdowns and lockdowns and not lockdowns. So the last one was this past January, where the kids weren't at school for the first 3 weeks after Christmas break. And they were back online. But technology's one of those things where we try to have a balance of time, because we love it. We love movies. We love television. This is how we talk to our friends in Texas. This is our family, who live in a different country, who we've been, this is the only way we get to talk to them. And so and especially was very important over COVID for us to have, like, we would play games on Discord, which was huge before Jen moved to Ireland. And that's what we would spend the first part of our pandemic. And I know for me mentally, that's how it helped. But yeah, too much, the poison's in the dosage. Too much of a good thing is not great. So it's teaching them the balance, and teaching them that they have the tools to be able to regulate for them, and know when too much is too much.
I agree. As a non-parent, it's easy for me to and I recognize this about myself, to judge, to look at parents that use the screens as basically as the babysitter, and think, oh God, ugh, you're being lazy, or you're letting, the screen take over or whatever. But I also recognize that, there's a time and place for it. So if it's, in limited quantities, if it's timed or kind of spaced out, then that's probably fine. I mean, I watched TV growing up. I didn't sit in front of the TV all the time, but I think I have an issue when it's, the kids are constantly on the screens everywhere you go, at the restaurant, in the car, at the house, and they don't go outside and they don't interact with other kids. And I see that more as like a developmental issue for the kids. In my view, it's like, well, they're not going to learn to function in these other ways, or they're only going to want to do this one thing. But again, I don't have kids, so it's easy for me to say that because I understand, like, once you're raising them, a lot of things happen, and sometimes you just need that break. As a person consuming media, I definitely have to be conscious of how much I use the screen and how much I use social media, especially. And for me, a lot of it's just avoidance. Like, I didn't have Instagram for a long time, and now I don't have TikTok, and I swear I'm never going to get it. And I'm sure I will at some point because I said that about Instagram. But it's more about just not looking at it. Like, I don't even log in. I stay away from it. And that seems to help me, like, limit, how much I use it. But because I know once I start, it'll be really hard to, like, pull away from it. And I've seen how much time gets wasted by kids and adults. And I'm just like, it's really hard because, like Chris said, there are good things about it. Technology helps connect us and help us keep up with the people we love across the world. And I love that about it, but I hate how much of a distraction it's become. And social media has also become kind of dangerous in a lot of circumstances when disinformation spread, and when, especially, like, not to get too political, but like political uprisings that promote certain ideologies in other countries or our own country that are just blatantly dangerous to certain groups of people. That's when I start worrying about, the extent of our reliance on these devices. And I don't know, personally, I also have kind of a strange phobia of, I need to be able to do the things my phone can do for me, just in case it ever dies or I'm in a situation where I don't have internet. So, like, I need to know how to read a map and read a bus schedule. And, like, I rely on my phone for all that, but I still want to know how to do it for myself because I have this weird fear of, like, I don't know, getting stranded in a foreign country and not being able to support myself. So I always try to still, like, know how to do the things that I'm asking my phone to do when I'm able to. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting, right? Because we only talk about often media and social media and screens in context of children, but really what I see, particularly once they get to be teenagers, is they're just doing what everybody around them is doing. So and I think, like, and we're in this interesting in between place as people, as adults now, who are the generation that are really bridging, like, the generations, right? Like, we're stepping into leadership, and we're the ones who actually are raising these Gen Zs and et cetera, and working with millennials and whatever. I feel like we're this bridge generation, and I think we have a pretty unexamined relationship to a lot of this stuff. So I just wonder. I wonder what other people are seeing, and how, I feel like I've gotten quite adept at talking about it and having conversations with experts who come on to talk about it in relationship to children, and they all, like, an expert will always bring up that it's really us grown-ups that have to start facing into our own kind of unchecked reliances. Like, it's like anything else, that if you're not examining your use of it, then it is not a tool. You are its tool. And yeah, so I just was curious. I'm like, do people talk about that in, like, grown-up circles that don't have, like, young people? Are people talking about, particularly in the green circle? Because I think, like, I think greenies often are the worst because we feel really like our work is for a cause, and so there shouldn't be any limits on, like on and because there's often a lot of technology that is helping us do super great stuff. So which doesn't mean technology is bad, nor that technology is all good. It's just an interesting question that I was wondering whether we actually talk about in the green world separate from kids. So thanks for your.
I think that, yeah, like the conversations I've had with people, friends and family around technology is more about like the amount of time it takes up, especially TV. Like I don't consume TV personally anymore unless it's a specific series that's out and finished and I go through it, but I don't like, just flip through channels or watch, see what's out there. Like I'm in and out. And I know that makes me an outlier because most of my friends spend the majority of their free time watching TV, and I do watch movies, but I kind of like when I look at that, I look at it from the aspect of like how much is that distracting us from doing the activist work or doing the work that needs to be done to improve our lives or whatever. And that's where it worries me, is that like there's so much content out there between TV and social media and movies and everything. It's overwhelming. And how do you limit it to where you're still like giving yourself that outlet, but you're also, doing the things in your life that you need to do? Because I can get really easily sucked into a new game or TV or something and then lose a whole day or two. And I'm like, oh, I can't let this become the norm. Like that scares me. And as someone who, yeah, like you said, kind of bridged the generations between pre-internet and now we have internet for everything. It's really easy to be like, wow, we can do all these things because we never, like internet can help us figure everything out. But yeah, there's also downside for sure.
And I feel like too, after through this pandemic time, like I started managing time really differently because you just jumped on Zoom, right? So we jumped on the computer for everything, and like gone were like the coffee breaks, the human interaction, the time to get to things. And now I notice that in my scheduling, as we go back to real time, I just think that you can go back to back to back, and you eat your meal like with one hand while you're driving to, and so I'm hoping that we figure out a way to, and by we, I mean me, to not just have used our ability now to do anything on the computer, that we haven't just figured out more ways to like shove in work, and fewer ways to actually have human interaction.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of unlearning and relearning we have to do after the pandemic because a lot of things, just changed overnight, literally. So we have to figure out new ways of existing, I think. Well, ladies, thank you so much for being on and sharing your thoughts. I guess we'll go ahead and move on to our Green Life Hack portion of the show, where we just share one, thing that you can do in your personal life to help you live more sustainably or inspire sustainability in those around you. So, Chris, do you have one?
So I think because we're in a world of hustle, of like go go go, you got to be productivity, and the way I work is that I can't. I have to be a very deliberate person with how I spend my time because I can get easily overwhelmed and anxiety takes over. So for me, slowing down is very important. So having a slow hobby like knitting or crocheting. I hear sourdough's a thing. Just slowing down and just having to be patient with something that you can't rush, I think is really important, especially in today's, like hustle society, where the busier you are, the better of a person you are. So yeah, that's what I liked. I have a lot of grandma hobbies, as they were. Like I know Jen's a big gardener, so I like crocheting. I like baking. Things you can't. Reading. I'm a huge book nerd. Reading. So just anything that forces you to slow down, that you cannot rush, so you actually enjoy the process and just like calm down a little bit and kind of decompress. And you don't have to turn it into a job. You have a hobby. That's just a hobby.
Yeah, everything doesn't have to become a hustle,
No,
side hustle.
and you don't even have to be fantastic at it as long as you just find some sort of pleasure from it. That's all you need.
I love that because I have a lot of those grandma hobbies too, and I never thought about it as like maybe that's my balance because I am a go go go, like constantly on the run type of person. But I enjoy baking and reading and doing some of these slower things. So yeah, I never really thought that's balancing me out and giving me the release I need. Well, that's great. Mine is since we're talking about teens and kids in general. This could kind of apply to any age, I guess. But when you're a teenager, especially, I think, and people want to give you gifts, it kind of gets harder to buy for teens, anyways, like physical things. And I've always been of the mind that I don't need more stuff. So if you're going to gift something to a kid or teenager or anybody, try gifting an experience or just do something, give them your time versus gifting them things that are going to clutter up the house, may or may not get used, may break or whatever. So you can go to a concert, you can go to a ball game, go to the park, do something fun. Just a thing, and not a physical thing, but like an action or an experience. So yeah, that's my life hack is to not consume as much. Manda, are you ready for us?
Yes, I love those life hacks so much. I was just thinking about all the grandma hobbies that I was like, oh my gosh, I want to say grandma hobbies too. Let's all slow down. But I one of the things that I think Chris, you're hinting at is we are just who we are, no matter where we live. So I certainly could be more slowed down because I live in a slowed down kind of community, but instead I'm not. Um, I would say maybe my also teen focused green life hack is completely ridiculous, but it's something you both said. So I'm going to do my own version of it, which is go and buy a graphic novel. I just think graphic novels are a great thing that has come in with this generation, and we're a family that really deeply loves literature. We've read together until my kids were teenagers, and then they wouldn't read with me. We read a lot. We listen to a huge number of audiobooks, and we love graphic novels. And I think that for adults who don't have teenagers in their life, to see the quality of literature that is coming out and the really serious, poignant things that are being dealt with through what might to many people just seem like comics or cartoons, but are actually this art form that is allowing this generation to grapple with huge things around the earth and climate and identity and what we are, what they're going to do with their one little precious lives. So go out and experience one of these beautiful pieces of art and literature and in a way that next generation is doing it. So
I love that. Yeah, it's a great new way to experience the world, and I'm always looking for new ways to do that. So thank you. So I guess we'll go ahead and close out by sharing where we can be found online. So, Chris, where can we find you on the internet, in the world?
The interwebs. You can find me sometimes here, and then over at Epically Geeky, which is our parent company. That sounds weird. So we do Marginally Geeky, Creatively Geeky, and the main show, and then here, and then on Instagram at Moody Midlife.
And Mando, where can we find you online?
you can find me at thegreenmama.com or / the Green Mama, and that's TheGreenMama. You can also check out my other series of podcasts at Folk University, which is folku.ca. And you can find me with my Green Teen podcast on the Eco Parent Network podcast /podcasts.
Great. Yeah. And I will, of course, include the links to all this in the show notes. So if you missed any of it, you can find that there. And you can find me here on Sustainably Geeky, occasionally on Marginally and Ethically Geeky, as Chris mentioned, and on the internet at Het's Gonna Be Me on Instagram and Twitter. And then you can find the show at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook and YouTube at Sustainably Geeky. And then wherever you listen to podcasts, we should be on there. So subscribe to us, like us, give us a thumbs up, 5 stars, whatever they let you do. Helps us get the word out. And if you find a show you like, share it with a friend. And yeah, if you have any ideas for topics or speaker suggestion or guest suggestions, feel free to send that on to us through the website or through social media. We'd love to hear your suggestions. So again, thank you ladies for being on, and everyone listening, have a great rest of your day.